What up YouTube, Nissan here, and today I'm going to show you how to install an engine short-ram intake for a 2013 to 2016 Nissan Sentra. And one thing I want to say before I install the short-ram intake to my Nissan Sentra is, personally, to be honest, I'm not really a big fan of the short-ram intake. But since I don't make a true cold air intake for the 2013 to 2016 Nissan Sentra, and since I've seen such good reviews of the short-ram for the newer Sentras, I want to see if it actually increases horsepower, acceleration, and even gas mileage nonetheless. So let's get to it. Alright, so the tools you're going to need are a screwdriver with both a flathead and a Phillips head, and then a 7mm regular socket, an 8mm socket, and a 10mm socket. And those three sockets are going to be for a 1/4 inch drive ratchet. And you're also going to need a 10mm deep socket for a 3/8 inch ratchet. And you're also going to need a pair of pliers. Basically, before I get to installing this intake, I basically just want to show you what it looks like inside this tube. Let's take a look inside really quick. And if you look really closely in there, like right where it goes over the mass airflow sensor, there's that tube in there. And the reason why that's in there, so when the air is going inside, you know, into the throttle body and into the engine, the mass airflow sensor doesn't throw a code, so there's no check engine light. So that's why that tube is in there. Okay, finally, an installation process. And the first thing, obviously, what you want to do is disconnect the negative terminal with the battery. And this, I believe it's a 10mm socket. But the problem is, when I'm trying to get into that bolt there, that the air box in that intake tube gets in the way. So I'm going to have to remove that first. Okay, now that I'm basically looking through the bag where, you know, there's the clamps and then there's the instructions. Basically what I found is that there's both these instructions for how to install it for a 2013 and supposedly up to a 2016 Nissan Sentra. I also got instructions of how to put in the RD 1935 intake on a 2000 to 2001 Nissan Maxima. I think it's kind of funny the engine also threw it in there. It could have been a mistake, but again, no big deal. I just thought it was kind of funny and I thought I would point it out. Alright, now that the stock air intake hose and outer part of the air box is out, now we can take our ratchet with our 10mm socket, put it over the bolt over the negative terminal of the battery, and of course make sure it's on loosen, which is it is. Again, put it over the bolt, loosen it up. Alright, now that I actually have the negative terminal of the battery disconnected, I even have my heart rate for the battery in that box over there. Basically, I can take my mass airflow sensor right now and just disconnect it. Alright, now I can actually start disconnecting this intake. So I want to have the flathead part of my screwdriver on, which it is, and pretty much just start loosening up that bolt right there. Alright, the next thing I want to do is just loosen up that 10mm screw right there on the top right of the air box. So right in my hand, as you can see, I have my ratchet with my 10mm socket. I'm just going to put it over the bolt and loosen it up. Alright, now that that's done, I want to take my screwdriver with my flathead bit on it and basically start loosening up this clamp right here. Alright, so the next thing you want to do is disconnect this line for the mass airflow sensor from the air box. And as you can see, there's one clip over here and there's one clip over there. So basically I'm going to need my needle nose pliers right here. And for this clip on the left over here of the air box, there should be a clip right behind where I should be able to get it. And for this one, it should be underneath. It's kind of hard to record and do it at the same time, so I'm going to switch over. Okay, so basically since that clip right there is being kind of a pain in the butt, I'm just going to go ahead and remove the rest of this intake. And there's a screw up here that I believe is a 10mm. I'm just going to remove that as well. Okay, so now I have the stock air box on the ground here, and the next thing I'm going to do is remove the stock mass airflow sensor from the air box. And you're supposed to use a 7mm nut driver, but since I don't have one, I'm instead going to use my ratchet with my 7mm socket. Alright, now that you see that the stock intake is fully out of the car now, so the last thing I have to do before I can start putting the new, better engine intake in is loosen up these two 10mm bolts right there, so I can move the battery over. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is take my 3/8 inch ratchet with my 10mm deep socket and pretty much loosen up these two screws right here and right here. The purpose I want to do that is that so I can loosen up this tie bar so I can move the battery over to the left so I can be able to fit in my new engine intake tube right on. Okay, so now that I have the battery moved over, all I have to do is take my 10mm deep socket and retighten down this tie bar, and I can pretty much start installing my new intake. Alright, now that I have the battery tied down, I can pretty much just take the mass airflow sensor from the old intake tube, which is right over there, from the old air box, and pretty much put it into the mass airflow sensor of my new engine intake. By the way, it goes in this way, and make sure you're very careful putting this in because these mass airflow sensors are very sensitive and very expensive to replace. And I can very, very gently use my 1/4 inch ratchet with a 7mm socket to very, very gently tighten that in. Alright, now that that's done, the next thing I need to do is take my hose with the clamps on for both the throttle body and for the hard crankcase line. And this time I'm going to use my 1/4 inch ratchet, but this time I'm going to use an 8mm socket. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is basically just take our vibra mount and screw it in this hole right here. And as you can see, it's threaded in there, so that's the only place where we can screw this in. Right now, as you can see, these two hoses are clamped on right here, and the crankcase hose is clamped down right here. I have to still tighten those two down later when I put the pipe in. So right here is my new engine intake pipe, and as you can see, my mass airflow sensor is already screwed in, so the next thing I need to do is basically fit it into there. Alright, now that I have the pipe in, and to be honest, it took me a few minutes to get this pipe in. Basically, I can take my washer and my nut, and showing it, but basically tighten around this this mount over here, and basically tighten that down with the socket, and basically go back and tighten down these two clamps on both the throttle body and the crankcase line, and tighten it down with an 8mm socket. Alright, now that I have the engine pipe in and I have all my clamps tightened down, right here, right here, and right here, I just need to take my filter and use a flathead screwdriver to tighten on that hole right there. Alright, now that the filter's on, the last two things I need to do in this order is reconnect the mass airflow sensor to reconnect the negative terminal of my battery. Alright, now that both the mass airflow sensor and the battery are now connected, I'm now ready to start this thing up. Alright, so here's another sound clip for you guys.